Let's start with the Chris Beard element of things. And by now, everybody knows the backstory on this one. He was the Texas head coach as of about 6-8 weeks ago. Prior to that, in December, was in the middle of a very successful season, Texas in the top 10. Chris Beard gets arrested on a Sunday night in December. Chris Beard gets suspended as the Texas head coach. He is charged with 2 felony crimes, according to the police report. And I don't mean to relitigate it. I'm just trying to let everybody know for people who forgot details. But he was alleged to have choked his fiance, thrown her on the floor. Texas ends up firing him in January. And it's important to note that after Texas's firing, those charges were dropped. And so, as I always say on this show, every Friday we do Aaron right, Aaron wrong. We talk about what I got right and what I got wrong. And I will readily admit that because of the details of the police report, because things looked really bad at the time of the arrest, at the time of the suspension, and at the time of his firing, I said that Chris Beard would probably never coach college basketball again. Even if the charges were dropped, I didn't think it was going to happen. But when the charges were dropped, I kind of came to my senses and I said, I might not like it. It might not be the decision that I made. I might personally think that it's best for him to sit out for a year to rehabilitate his image, rehabilitate his relationship with his fiance that I assume is still going on. But there's a difference between what should happen and what will happen. And as soon as those charges were dropped about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I said, I think this guy is going to coach again. As a matter of fact, last Friday, right here on the Aaron Torres podcast, if you listened, and if you didn't, go back and listen, we did a coaching carousel kind of, preview on the show. And I said, there aren't very many jobs that I think make sense for Chris Beard this year. The jobs that are going to open doesn't really feel like a fit. Can't see him going to Cal Berkeley. Can't see him going to Georgetown. Can't see him going to Georgia Tech. But I did say there was one job that I thought would make sense for him and that I think, kind of on the flip side, I think he would be interested in, and that was Ole Miss. Ole Miss had fired Kermit Davis, and it just felt like if there was one job that kind of sort of made sense, it was probably this one. And so I bring it up because on Monday, one of the Ole Miss websites that covers Ole Miss do a really good job, the On3 affiliate, reported that Chris Beard and Ole Miss had a conversation and had met on Monday. Now, it's important to note a lot of things because I put that out on Twitter and people blew up. I shared the report from the Ole Miss website and people went crazy. How can Ole Miss do this? Da-da-da-da, this and that, blah, 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 whatever. One, as I always say, it only takes one, but it's important to note, and I think this is really important right now. Just because they met, all that means is that they met. The way that I gauge what happened on Monday was a little bit like a blind date at a coffee shop. Somebody tells you to meet here, you meet there, you get to know each other, blah, 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 this and that. Just because they met does not mean that Ole Miss is going to offer Chris Beard a job. And it does not mean that if Chris Beard was even offered, that he would accept it. So I don't want to blow this story out of proportion. I don't want to pretend like it's a done deal and what does it mean and should he be hired and blah, 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 blah. But what I would also say is I don't believe that either side takes that interview if there isn't actual mutual interest. And so has an offer been made? We don't know. Will Chris Beard accept it? We don't know. But if Ole Miss wasn't interested in learning more about Chris Beard, I don't believe that they set up that interview knowing that it's probably going to get leaked and knowing that people like me are going to be talking about this in the media. On the flip side, if you're Chris Beard and you either want a year off, you want to work on your relationship with your fiance, you don't want to coach in Ole Miss, you don't want to coach in the SEC, you only want to coach in Texas, whatever the reason is. If this isn't an opportunity that interests you, you probably don't take the meeting. Again, if Cal Berkeley called Chris Beard, if Idaho State called Chris Beard, if Minnesota, whatever, like just because you get a call doesn't mean you have to take the call and you have to take the meeting. And so because the call was made and because the meeting was done, I think this at least has a very reasonable chance of happening. Not saying it's 100% because, oh, by the way, there might be other places reaching out to Chris Beard here soon, but it feels like it's at least a possibility. And so from Chris Beard's perspective, listen, I'm not here to say what he should or should not do. I don't know what else is going to be out there. I don't know how quickly he wants to get back into things. I don't, whether Chris Beard should take the job or not is independent of what I want to talk about next. And that's this. Should Ole Miss actually be pursuing Chris Beard in the first place? Because to me, that's the more interesting thing. If Chris Beard has an offer and he takes it, that's a Chris Beard decision. But somebody's got to put a piece of paper in front of him and offer him the opportunity to be their head coach. And to me, that is the much more interesting part of the Ole Miss Chris Beard situation. Do you actually put that piece of paper in front of him? Because I think there's a lot of positives, but boy, oh boy, am I positive that there's a lot of negatives as well. And so what I want to do over the next few minutes is just kind of talk this out. If you're the Ole Miss AD Keith Carter, what is going through your head? Because on the one hand, this looks like just even having the meeting with him looks really, really, really bad. And a couple things struck me when I saw that this meeting actually happened. It's one thing for guys like me to hear stuff might be happening and speculate on what could happen. It's another thing for us to find out that the meeting is happening. And so a couple things really struck me about the Ole Miss perspective. On the one hand, it does not look good. We know what Chris Beard was accused of. We know what the police report says. And just because charges got dropped does not mean that Chris Beard did nothing wrong. Now, I'm not here to say what he did do, what he didn't do, that's independent of what is in the police report and what he was accused of, which was really bad. That's not good. And so if you're Ole Miss, you kind of have to weigh that and you have to consider a few things. One, if I'm the Ole Miss AD, and maybe this is what Monday's meeting was about, I want to know every detail from your perspective and from your fiance's perspective of what happened that night. What happened? How did it go down? What's the truth? What's fiction? Why were the charges dropped? Was this an incident that has ever happened before? Will it ever happen again? Was there substances involved on either side? Let's be blunt. I think it's fair to ask, are you still in a relationship with this woman? Is this a healthy relationship? I'm not saying that it's my job as Aaron Torres, the media member, to speculate. I do think if you're going to employ this guy, I think those are all very fair questions. And oh, by the way, you're not just going to employ him. He is going to be one of the two faces of your university alongside Lane Kiffin. He is going to be making millions of dollars. And to me, it seems fair to ask these questions, especially after such a short amount of time. It's not like he's been out of coaching for 2, 3, 4 years, been on TV, doing media stuff, making speeches, doing whatever. This all happened 2.5 months ago. He was fired a month and a half ago. And so to me, it's completely reasonable to ask these questions. And you know why else it's reasonable? Because if you actually go through with this hire, you're going to get it from everywhere. Like, one, you're obviously going to get it from opposing fans. Oh, it's going to be a thing when you walk into Auburn and Tennessee and Arkansas and Mississippi State and LSU and Kentucky. And oh, by the way, you're going to be playing Texas in a few years. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying that anybody who boos him or whatever is good or bad or this or that. I'm just saying it's a reality. But you know what else strikes me about this? It's not just going to be Ole Miss fans. It's not just going to be other SEC fans that are not happy with this hire and that don't think this guy should be hired. There's going to be division in your own fan base. Now, admittedly, there's division in every fan base with every hire. Outside of like 5 hires in my lifetime, Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, Urban Meyer at Ohio State, Scott Frost at Nebraska, Lincoln Riley at USC, just about every hire has division. But there will be very strong opposition within your own fan base, let alone all those other fans. And so these are things you got to think about. And then I think most importantly, you better make sure your president is in line with this, your board of trustees is in line with this, because I'm just telling you, this can't be a thing where you come back for a second, third interview and you're ready to move forward only to find out that the president, you got to figure it out. That's the negative of it. The positive of it, and the reason this is even happening, and it is worth mentioning, it's because Chris Beard is a really good basketball coach. And so it is the push-pull, the tug, the tug of war, whatever you want to call it. Because when I look at this situation, it is a tough call, right? Because you're Ole Miss, and we all know the history of Ole Miss basketball. We all know how bad they've been forever. And we all know that you can't normally, under normal circumstances, get a coach with the on-the-court resume of Chris Beard. Chris Beard, for what it's worth, his resume is pretty much impeccable. Goes to Little Rock, year one, makes the NCAA tournament, upsets Purdue. Goes to Texas Tech, year two at Texas Tech, goes to the Elite Eight. Year three, plays for a national championship. Goes to Texas in year one, first NCAA tournament win in a long time for Texas. And in year two at Texas, he had a team that was and is good enough to win the national championship. And so if you're Ole Miss, you got to factor in all these things. You got to look at all these things. Is it worth it? Is the PR worth it? Is it this? Is it that? But then on the other side, is it worth it? Because this is a guy, a caliber of coach that you point blank, end of story, could not get if he was not embroiled in controversy. So I'll be curious to see what happens for a few different reasons. Well, I mean, I'm curious just in general, but there's a few different variables that I'm very interested in. One, the Ole Miss AD is a basketball guy. His name's Keith Carter. He played basketball at Ole Miss. And so that's why this is especially interesting, because I think there's a lot of ADs, especially in the SEC. They're kind of risk averse in basketball. And what I mean by that is, yeah, they want to win in basketball, but they don't want to bring any extra controversy to campus if it involves anything other than football, right? Like I think that's probably what's going on at some other schools. It's probably what's going on at LSU right now. They got rid of Will Wade because Will Wade was causing all sorts of chaos. Bring in Matt McMahon. He's clean. He's whatever. He's this, he's that. You're not going to add a spotlight in a negative way from anything other than, you're not going to add a negative spotlight onto the athletic department while the football team under Brian Kelly is thriving. But Ole Miss might be a little bit different because they already got the football coach and the AD is a true basketball guy. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. And it'll be interesting also from another perspective. Ole Miss may soon have some competition in the Chris Beard sweepstakes. And so let's talk about this, because have you seen what has happened at Texas Tech? Texas Tech was, of course, Chris Beard's employer prior to Texas. He left two winters ago, spring of 2021. It's crazy that he just left Texas Tech that recently, but they're embroiled in a little bit of controversy. And it's interesting because I was out to lunch on Friday. Buddy of mine, you know who you are, actually a listener of this show. And I go to the bathroom, I look at my phone, I have a text. Hey, Torres, you hearing anything going on at Texas Tech right now? And I responded, but whatever. And so I bring it up because we got a big story out of Texas Tech on Sunday. It was kind of breaking as I was recording. We had enough to talk about, so I saved it for today. But there is chaos at Texas Tech right now. So essentially, Mark Adams is the head coach at Texas Tech. He is the guy that replaced Chris Beard. And he is a very interesting character in his own right. 66, 67 years old, somewhere in that range. He's been around forever, was out of coaching, came back as Beard's assistant at Little Rock, goes with him to Texas Tech, and then stays at Texas Tech to take over for Chris Beard. Year one, has a ton of success, goes to the Sweet 16. But right away, you kind of knew there was something going on there, because their two best players, Kevin McCullough, who's now at Kansas, and Terrence Shannon, who's now at Illinois, both decided to transfer out. And so it's not normal when you have a Sweet 16 team and your two best players are coming back and they both decide to transfer. So right there, you kind of knew something was going on. And I've kind of heard all year long that something's not quite right there. Some issues maybe with NIL, some issues in the locker room. Well, on Sunday, we got details of something that's much bigger than that. The story goes is that essentially Mark Adams, their head coach, is officially suspended from the school right now, essentially for making some comments that were perceived by the recipient of those comments to be racially charged. I'm not here to talk about somebody else's feelings, but essentially the comments derived from Mark Adams quoting something that he says came from the Bible. But essentially, the reference was to what Mark Adams claims, and I'll just read his quote to Jeff Goodman from Stadium verbatim. But according to Mark Adams, he said, "I was quoting the scripture." This is an interview with Jeff Goodman. "It was a private conversation about coaching and when you have a job and being coachable. I said that in the Bible that Jesus talks about how we all have bosses and we all have servants. I was quoting the Bible about that." That's Mark Adams' version of events. Again, I am not here to say who's right and who's wrong and who should feel what way and who should feel this and who should feel that. But if you read other reports that aren't directly from Mark Adams, the insinuation is that it was a direct reference to slavery. And again, I'm not here to twist people's words, this, that, the other thing. What I am here to say is in 2023, we probably, whether it's the Bible, whether it's the whatever, should not be referencing slavery at all, especially to young African-American men playing basketball for, let's be honest, an old white man. So it was at best a bad look. It was at worst a very racially charged comment. And on top of that, there's also this weird accusation that Mark Adams spit at somebody and he claims that he had a dental surgery and whatever. The point is that Mark Adams was put on indefinite leave. I don't think this guy ever coaches again, because at the end of the day, I'm not sold that Texas Tech wanted to bring him back. And so I'm not sure if this is like a chicken and the egg thing. Like, did they not want to bring him back so this story came out? Or is this story the reason why the team stinks because they don't trust the guy because he's a jerk and an alleged racist, according to the reports that came out? I don't know, but I do know that Texas Tech is probably going to move on. They're going to fire him. They're going to eventually fire him with cause. We've seen this a million times, right? When the school puts you on paid administrative leave, what it means is they're calling the lawyers out of the bullpen and they're saying, figure out a way to get us out of this contract. Mark Adams would be owed about $7 million in buyout money if he were to be fired with cause. Don't think he ever coaches again. I think he gets fired with cause. And so now that leads to the $30,000 question, which is Chris Beard to Texas Tech. And all I'll say is, listen, I try to cover as much as I can and be in tune with as much as I can. I know it sounds sexy and I know it sounds fun. And Texas Tech fans, correct me if I'm wrong. This is one I don't really see happening. Chris Beard left 2 years ago in the middle of the night to a rival school at the University of Texas. They're clearly rivals. There's clearly bad blood. And I don't think most of the fan base has moved on from that. Now, if this was 6-7 years down the road, you're 2-3 coaches removed, maybe it's a different deal. But you're still you're like 24 months removed from Chris Beard leaving you for your cross-state rival. So to me, this one doesn't make sense. And the good thing, if you're a Texas Tech fan, I think there's other good candidates that could potentially take this job. Grant McCasland, the head coach at North Texas, I think makes a ton of sense there. Paul Mills at Oral Roberts, I think probably makes a ton of sense. I don't think Chris Beard is going back to Texas Tech.